I'm Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes. You might have seen me presenting the sport on the TV. But all you really need to know right now is that I'm horsey and that I've been affected by mental health issues in my family. So when Riders Minds asked if I'd be involved in making this film for them to showcase the incredible work they're doing with riders' mental health, obviously I said yes.
I want Riders Minds to be the go-to charity for all equestrian people, not just in the UK.
My journey starts in Nottinghamshire and I'm straight in at the deep end. I'm on my way to meet Victoria Wright. She's the widow of Matthew Wright, a top British event rider who at the age of just 38 tragically took his own life earlier this year. Now, Matthew and Victoria had already set up the Riders Minds charity before he died, specifically to help equestrian people like him with mental health problems. But it was too late for Matthew. This is it. I'd really love to know your story with Matthew. How did you meet? What was he like? Tell me the story of you two, how you got together.
So we had always met through horses. My father had owned some horses with him. We probably knew each other for a good 10 years before we actually got together. I actually thought that he was a bit of an arsehole, to be honest.
What was he like as a rider, as a husband, as a dad?
A brilliant dad, absolutely brilliant dad. I think in terms of as a rider, he always had a very hard exterior, and I think people from the outside looking in probably thought that he was very tough. But actually, when you got to know him, probably the weakest part for him and why I think he struggled really to get back to the top level in his sport was that he was not actually that tough underneath it all. He was really quite soft. He achieved a huge amount of success from a young age, from young riders, juniors, ponies. The sport is tough.
Did he always struggle with his mental health?
He was fine up until young riders, and then I think then when he started to probably understand everything that was going on around him, because his parents probably took a lot of that pressure when he was very young, but then when he was then old enough to have to deal with that himself, with the owners, with sponsors, keeping everybody happy, keeping the business running, but also dealing with all the emotions of the animals as well, the fact that you're not, you're the soundness, things like that, problems happen all the time. And I think when you're putting your heart and soul into something, it's a massive blow when something goes wrong.
When did you first become aware that Matthew was struggling with his mental health?
I probably had always known when I met him, although I'd never have said anything. I didn't know him well enough at the time, but I always believed that he probably, he struggled. He was very insecure. He would always pretend that comments, things that people may have made, didn't bother him, but you could always actually really see that things got under his skin. Things did bother him all the time.
When did you get to the point where you knew this was not going to be fine?
Matt had attempted to take his own life several times. At that time, we did get him some counselling, we did get him help. And he did get, he improved for a couple of years. He would always talk about stuff with me. He'd always tell me when he was feeling low.
And did you think actually
conversely, that he was in a good place at that time?
I think he was probably the happiest I've ever been, because whether he had planned it and he knew that he decided that the time was right to take his own life, it did all seem very, very planned. So yeah, I don't know. He'd woken up and it was Valentine's Day. We had flowers like delivered to the door, which I was thinking, that's really nice of him, you know. I mean, yeah, okay, he was always kind like that. He'd always do nice things, but he'd gone to so much length and detail. He cooked a 6-course dinner, and he sent me a message that morning that just said that today is the perfect day. I look back now and I think, the perfect day for what?
If you can, just tell me what happened. How did the day pan out?
In the morning, he had taken the kids all riding. He said he wanted to take them all out on the ponies and spend the morning with them. Then they would take Martin, who obviously lives in the cottage on site. He then took them in the afternoon to then go and make some cakes and do baking with them, so that, because in the afternoon we had dinner. And then we got the kids back for the evening. Martin brought them back. We'd had a lovely day. Matt appeared totally normal, apart from at dinner. He was saying things to me like, you know, we've done some great stuff, haven't we? And almost reminiscing on you know, places that we'd been to, you know, nice memories that we had, which probably was him reflecting on everything. I took the kids downstairs to bed. I did the usual thing where you put them to bed, you read them a story, while they're, you know, before I went upstairs, I flicked on Facebook, things like that, you know, it's just all normal things to do. And then I came back upstairs, and he was dead. He was dead. Found him in the bedroom. And then you know, you kick yourself. Why was I sat looking through my phone? Why was I doing things like that? Why did I not go upstairs 10 minutes earlier, or go and I could have stopped him. I could have, you know, I could have seen what he was trying to do or what he was doing, but managed to get him down. Obviously, we were on the phone to the ambulance, but I knew he was dead. I knew he was dead.
You can't have done anything really, can you? I mean, you know that.
I know that, but you still feel guilty. I feel so guilty now. You can only look back on it now, and I just think that, you know, whenever anybody is saying that they're going to take their own life, or it becomes normal living with somebody with a mental illness, don't ever think that they're not going to do anything.
So there you are, Matt's taken his life, you've got 3 kids, you've not lived here very long.
No.
You've got business to run. How have you kept it together? How are you sitting here now even talking to me? How have you done this?
Because of the kids. I can't sit in the corner rocking, and because the kids can't look at me doing that. This all happened throughout the night. They took Matt away. The kids came to me at 6:30 the next morning and having to tell them that Daddy's died. That's one of the hardest things which I've ever had to do, and I think ever will have to do. The first 2 weeks I think just felt completely surreal. I don't think I'd ever had that many people in the house before, and because we'd all been social distancing, and obviously with COVID, and a lot of the thing is you hadn't seen people, so it's the most I'd seen my family and friends for a long time. So you just put a bag over your head and just keep thinking, right, keep it together, it's all going to be okay. I think the real reality first hits you with everything is all of a sudden when all those people have gone again, because you know they all go back to their own lives, and then it's when they'd all gone back to their own lives that then you go, right, okay, now I'm here, it's just me and I've got 3 children.
What's really unusual about your charity is that you and Matthew set this up when he was still very much here.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why the two of you set it up, and then we'll talk about how you're hoping it can help people.
At the time, Matt was writing blogs for Horse and Hound, and in those blogs he was always very open and upfront about speaking about the mental health problems that he'd had. He could talk about it, he always wanted to help other people. When obviously he spoke about stuff in these blogs, we started getting letters and people emailing us and writing to us saying that they had struggled too with the sport. Other professional riders saying, I experienced that as well when I was in Young Riders. I'd been through all of those things. He always wanted to help everybody. Then people were writing letters to him, emails that we were picking up saying that they'd experienced the same thing, and as I say, other professional riders had written to him and said that they had experienced the same pressures when they were also coming up through the ranks, and they'd all suffered as well with their own mental health. And he said that loads of people do, there's just nobody talks about it. And when we were then actually approached by the British Grooms Association, and they said that would Matt write a blog for the BGA, just basically another honest blog about his own mental health. He said that's absolutely fine. He wrote something for them, and then they had grooms' minds and employers' minds, and Matt then said, well, it just needs to be riders' minds. There needs to be something there that's there for everybody, that's a completely free to use helpline available 24 hours a day. You need to be able to reach as many people as possible and help as many people as possible. So we then met up with Lucy Catan and Sylvia Bruce from the British Grooms Association in London, and Matt was really passionate about the fact that there should be a rider's minds, and it kind of all went from there really, that we then just said, well, we'll set it up, funded the start of it ourselves just because the equestrian world just needed to have this service. We're adding services to it of a text line and also live chat service, so that there's more things there to be able to help people.
It's amazing. I think you're incredible. You already know that, but I do think you're incredible.
Thank you.
Victoria's just sent me down here to the indoor school to watch Matthew's best friend, who's also called Matthew Heath, another top British event rider, and he's been devastated by what happened to his friend. So many people are affected when something like this happens. He's offered to take on all of Matthew's 15 event horses, and he's riding Freya at the moment, and I'm going to have a little chat with him and just see how he's feeling about it all. That was really nice. What was Freya doing with Matthew before you took over?
So she'd been bought out of Germany and come over. She'd had her first season eventing. Matt had been very successful on it and won a couple of novices. Fortunately, because of her age, she'd had a foal in Germany, so she age-wise, she's at a good age to be able to really crack on. So she's come out this year. She's done a 2-star long and gone very well. She was placed there, and she's gone and done her first intermediate and been double clear, and is now ready to progress on and really get established at that next level.
Not easy though, taking on, I know everyone has new horses, but you're having 15 at once. That's not easy, is it? Yeah,
absolutely. They are all varying different ages, so it's meant that I've been able to get used to them at various different stages. They're not all looking to be out competing at the same weekend, so it gives you an opportunity to get to know the horses that little bit more, and we've just staggered it a little bit basically.
Thank you. Can we have a chat?
Yeah, no, of course.
I want to call you like the Matthews. Is that what you two were like? Were you, because you were best friends, weren't you?
Yeah, we were.
The Matthews?
Yeah, I suppose we're probably known as Matt and Matt, probably to most people, actually. Yeah, I'd get called Heathy and he'd get called Righty if we were getting too confused. But yeah, that was pretty much how it was. Yeah.
As his best friend, you were obviously aware he was struggling, but how much did you know about what was going on in his head?
I was always concerned that the day might come to a certain extent, but Matt was he was, as much as he was, quite open in certain ways about discussing it, he was also, to the people that were closest to him, he could be quite closed about it as well. Sometimes he'd really open up and sometimes he wouldn't. And he's stubborn like me, so the more you pushed him, the more likely he was to back off. So I just tried to make sure that I was there, on the end of the phone or at the end of the bar for a pint or whatever, on the days that he felt that he could discuss it. Where I really struggled was I just didn't. For me, in the weeks building up, he'd been very driven, very motivated, almost annoying to speak to on the phone because he got quite bully and really driven about what he was doing. I really was very surprised. It's a phone call I won't forget anyway.
Do you have any idea why?
I don't, and I've been unfortunate enough to be around a few people very close to me that have done it. I mean, Matt was my second friend in 2 weeks to do it.
Was your other friend a rider?
He wasn't, no. I think that was partly why my grief came from Matt a little bit later on as well, because I think I was a little bit closed down at that point already myself, if I'm honest.
Why do you think that riders in particular struggle and find life quite difficult?
We are lucky enough to be able to do our hobby for a living, but then when it becomes the added pressures of it becoming a career, it consumes your life a little bit. And the riding horses, any rider will tell you, is the best job in the world. The actual riding horses part, but there is a huge amount, as you can imagine, when you've got between 10, 15, 20 horses in, there's a huge amount of organisation that goes with that, staff, not necessarily the individual pressures that you put on yourself competing wise. I mean, obviously, lots of riders, including myself, I put huge pressure on myself, more pressure than anyone puts on me. And I think that has a certain amount to do with it, but I do think that it's just massively everything else that goes with it.
How do you think riders' minds can help other riders?
I think it's fantastic to have a system in place that riders can turn to people anonymously if they need to, and I mean that's really important as well, because most of us are all quite arrogant and don't want to be seen as weak, because that's just the way that riders are. I think the fact that there's someone there on the end of the phone to be able to call, and the awareness on social media that they're doing as well to make people believe that it's okay to come forward and to talk about things. It doesn't matter how big or small your pressures are, everybody deals with those things differently, and what can seem insignificant to some people can be the end of the world to others, and people need to be happy to come forward about everything, and if it's something that's affecting them, then they need to be able to come forward and talk about it.
Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
Riders' Minds has already helped so many people, and one of those who got to know Matthew before he died is the former flat jockey Dominic Fox. He'd been through a really tough time with his mental health, but he came out the other side.
I rode professionally for about 15 years. I would say I had a semi-successful career. I never reached the heights of a champion jockey, but I had a 15-year-long career out of it, which was more than most. I rode a few hundred winners around the world. I got to travel, and I would always look at it as a successful without being an astronomically successful career. But I always found racing is a very lonely place. You spend a lot of time in the car on your own. You drive to the races, you spend maybe 6-7 hours in the car on your own every day, dealing with the ups and downs like any sportsman would. Whether you're a Premier League footballer or an F1 driver, you have downs, whether that be missing a penalty like we've seen in the Euros, or but these people in these industries have people around them. They have a support network around them. The problem with racing is you don't really get that. your friends, so to speak, are your competitors. So you can't confide in them because you don't want to show weakness to your opponent. It's a very, single man life as well because of the time you spend in the car, the time that you spend on your own. So therefore, the help that you need when you are having low points, like everyone does in life, is very minimal. And I found that out, especially towards the end of my career. There's a saying that, I can't remember who said it now, that a sportsman dies twice, when his career ends and when the inevitable happens.
During this journey of this Rider's Mind film, I've heard lots of reasons why different people think that riders in particular are susceptible. And I think with jockeys, you didn't have the weight thing, did you?
No, I didn't have the weight thing. I was always quite lucky in that respect.
But obviously a lot of jockeys would have the weight thing. We all
Yes.
know how cranky we get when we don't eat.
Correct.
But as well as that, you've got the whole money thing going on.
Yes.
So you've got the angry punters, and then there's the whole social media
Yeah.
layer as well. So how much did that affect you?
I think jockeys are quite resilient to the online stuff. I know social media only really came out probably in the racing area, area, and became apparent that you were getting on abuse around 2012. So it hasn't been there for all that long a time. But I know when it was happening to me, I had people, the odd message here. I actually didn't, I'd brush it off. It honestly didn't bother me. And you shirted other lads in a way and we'd have a good laugh about it. And I know a few of them post them on their Facebook profiles and, get the support that way. What affected me actually was after I stopped riding, the personal online abuse that came afterwards. That is actually really hard to take. I don't mind someone abusing me about a ride I gave a horse, but the personal stuff that came after I retired, that was actually a lot harder to take, and it was a lot more personal, and that side of things I think does have an effect.
You had a really horrible experience with your mental health, didn't you?
I did.
And before that, was that before?
No, that was afterwards.
After you retired?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It was a culmination of things. I had a lot of bad injuries when I was riding, and then towards the end of my career, my father died very young. He was only 56. My mother got a brain tumour the same year, and I had a breakdown of a relationship all in about the space of about 18 months. So I was in a really quite low point and fragile, and I'd stopped race riding, so obviously all that together wasn't a great situation. And I never really sought any help, didn't really feel there's any help available. And I can't remember actually what the trigger point was, but it was in 2016, I remember driving the car, pulling on the side of the road and actually walking out into traffic. And that was the day I was taken into West Suffolk Hospital, and I was sectioned into the secure wing.
How long were you there for?
I was there 3 weeks, and it was the best 3 weeks I could have ever done. That is my only. A lot of people copy and paste what they say, and I'm a little bit different. A lot of people say, "Oh, you have to talk about it. You have to do this." For me, that's all rubbish, because when you're actually in it and you're living it, no one talks about it. The family don't talk about it. Your wife doesn't talk about it. You don't tell your friends. None of it happens. So the advice of, "Oh, talk about it makes it better," it doesn't, because you don't talk about it, and that is the bugbear of it. You only talk about it once you're better. But I always say to people, if you are struggling, check yourself in, because I don't want this to sound detrimental to anybody. But when you're actually put yourself, or you're taken into a situation where you're getting professional care, you meet people. And you meet people that are on a different level to you completely. And where you think hope is lost and you think you can't carry on, you meet people that are carrying on, and they are far worse than you. Far worse. And you think to yourself, I'm not actually at that stage yet. And it gives you such a level of realisation that is the best medicine anyone could ever have.
It sounds like you were lucky.
Very.
So how did you feel when you heard that Matthew didn't win his battle?
A lot of it is anger, and it's not directed at anyone. It's angry at how can this just keep on happening. It was in the same year, I'm not sure, I think it was the year we lost Liam Treadwell as well. Another friend of mine, James Banks, all quite quickly, one after the other. It's a really difficult thing to take when you see people all around you. Like, I was in racing on and off for 12 to 15 years. And I know we had a quick chat beforehand, and I said to you, like, you ask most people in life, do you know anyone that's taken their own life? You're very unlucky if you have. And since I've been in racing, I know at least 12 to 15 people. I know Liam Treadwell made news. I know James Banks made news. But along with them are 8, 10, 12, 15 lads and lasses that will never make the news.
Thanks so much, Dominic. It was really interesting, and I think you're a very lucky man.
Thank you very much, anytime, and I'm very lucky in more ways than one, but thank you.
Riding is basically my therapy. Without horses in my life, I think I'd find it hard really to get through the stresses and strains, and I don't know, they say, don't they, a canter is a cure for every evil. But I'd imagine that riding professionally would be a totally different game. We've already heard in this film that it's a precarious business being a professional rider, just from dealing with owners, dealing with injuries, the highs and the lows, the financial strain. So I'm wondering if people, therefore, that are involved in equestrian sport could be more susceptible to mental health issues. But as a journalist, I need the data. So I've arranged a Zoom interview with a top clinical psychologist called Dr. Duncan Law. And he works in this field already, and he knows more than most. Chef. Come on in. Hello, Dr. Law. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this for me. Can I just start by asking what sort of work you do?
Sure. Well, I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I worked in the NHS for 20 odd years, and then I've always worked in mental health ever since then. I'm an honorary associate professor at UCL in the Faculty of Brain Science, but most of my work these days is through an organisation called Changing Minds.
Dr. Law, I know that you're actually doing this interview from the IJF, the Injured Jockeys Fund. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I know you are already working with lots of people from the horse world. So tell me, what sort of work are you doing?
So Changing Minds and the Injured Jockey Fund partnered up about this time last year. There was a real recognition that mental health, mental well-being was a real issue in the industry. And there was a real commitment to build on the good work that was already happening. So we were invited in to work out of each of the 3 IJF centres to do 2 things really. One is to provide individual mental health support, either directly to people or advising the welfare teams that work out of the IJF. And also to think with the IJF and others in the industry about sort of these industry-wide issues and how, as an industry, racing can promote better mental health.
Why do you think that the horse industry, whether that's racing or eventing or whatever the sport is, why do you think that they might find it harder mentally to kind of cope with what's going on in their world?
I mean, that's a really important question, but it's a really hard question to answer. And what I'm hearing from people and what I know from the literature is that there are real specific stresses on jockeys particularly. The way the industry is structured, and I'm guessing this is the same in equestrian sports as it is in race riding, that it's a lot of individuals working with small groups of people, sometimes very small groups of people around them. So it's a really tough old industry to work in. Even people like A.P. McCoy, probably the most successful, certainly jump jockey of all time, talks about having lost more races than he'd won, probably lost more races than anyone, but also won more races than anyone. So it's a real losing game. It's an unusual sport in that sense.
So throughout the work that I've been doing on this film so far, I've really got a strong impression that there are definite reasons why people who are riding might be more susceptible to mental health issues. So from your point of view as a top clinical psychologist, do you think that there are strong reasons why people might suffer more, and why?
In the general population, so people outside of riding, we'd expect over the course of a year that 1 in 4 people would have a serious mental health problem. It's about 25% of the population. In the Liverpool John Moores study, people were reporting close to 90% of saying that they were struggling with either stress, anxiety, or depression. Now, with self-report studies, we don't know how people are sort of defining anxiety and depression and stress. But even where there have been more controlled studies where people have been given, so it's not self-reporting, it's been people have been given screening questionnaires to look at mental health, that even those studies report probably double the general population, around 54% of jockeys, professional and amateur jockeys.
Wow, I'm actually shocked. I really didn't think it was going to be that many. I didn't think the data would be that strong, and I'm really shocked. And I feel bad. I feel quite emotional because, it's a tough world out there, and it's tough for everyone. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
You could say these are first world problems, couldn't you? Working with horses is a gift, but that's high. What can people do to try and mitigate the effects that we discussed, and to have better mental health?
The earlier we can get to the kind of people just starting out their careers as riders, the better we can do. But also to start that conversation, to say at the very start of your career, talking about mental health is kind of on the agenda. We are encouraging you to do it. We are saying it's a good thing to do. We're saying it's a good thing for you to do, but it's also good for your career. And that's what they're interested in at that stage, quite rightly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Law. I'm really grateful. Just having those stats will make a real difference to this film.
Thank you.
So often, social media is criticised for being detrimental to people's mental health, but it can be a positive thing. So I've come to meet the equestrian influencer and vlogger Kate Lewis to hear her story. Kate, you're really interesting to me because, as most people say that social media can be detrimental to them and everything else, and you're really using it for a force for good, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Tell me your story. Tell me why you're doing this, why you want to help Riders Mind, about your life, about your mental health.
So my mental health struggle started when I was about 13 years old. I was back in school and I was bullied quite badly, and to the extent where my parents took me out of school and I was homeschooled for the rest of my school years, in my GCSE years. So that affected me quite a lot because after I left, I was then isolated, more or less. So my social media was my only interaction with friends and other people. So I started doing a lot more on social media, making a lot more videos, and I got to learn to be more socialised through that. And then I started competing more often, and that got me out and about and seeing people. And it wasn't until I was about 17 I decided to actually start talking about my mental health struggles on my YouTube, because until then it had always been something that I'd kept so private, and I sort of buried that deep within myself. And I found that actually talking about it is the best way to help. So, but I had no idea at the time how just me talking about my personal struggles would help others.
In your experience, why would riders specifically struggle with their mental health?
Well, the sport that we are in is unfortunately a very difficult one for your mental health, as with a lot of sport. But with ours, we're working with an animal who doesn't speak our language. So it can often be a lot of miscommunication, and there's a lot of disappointments in our sport, not just in results in competition, but also with lameness issues and health issues with the animals. So it's something that can be quite detrimental to your mental health.
Are there lots of young riders, do you think, who have problems with their mental health?
I think so. I mean, just through talking about it on my social medias, I've come across so many people who've reached out and asked for advice or help, or, you know, for me to direct them where to go to. So yeah, I found that quite a few people do struggle with it. And I just think if we can all learn to speak about it more and be more open with one another, it would help us all to get through it a lot easier.
How bad did it get for you? How dark were the dark times?
So for me, it got to a point where I was having quite a lot of nasty thoughts about doing things to myself, and I realised I had to do something quick, otherwise I was going to go down a path that I didn't want to go down. So that was when I reached out to my doctor, and I remember the phone call, and it took me, I was sat there for nearly an hour trying to work up the courage to make that call. But as soon as I did, it just got the ball rolling for me, and I soon had someone to speak to on a regular basis, and I actually started out on medication too to help me, which I'm very proud that I no longer need, and I'm living a much happier lifestyle now. And even with the stresses, I'm probably more stressed now than I was back then when I was initially diagnosed, and I've had a lot more traumas and things come my way, and I'm able to deal with them and cope now, and I just feel like I'm a different person now to who I was before. So yeah, it's really nice to realise that it is possible to get to the other side. And yeah, I'd encourage anyone else to do the same and go and speak to someone and start that journey, because you never know where you are in that dark tunnel. You could have just one corner left until you see the light. So yeah.
Thank you. That's really lovely. The final piece in this jigsaw is to meet Sylvia Bruce, Riders Minds director. Now, outwardly, for many years, she had a successful career in global banking, but in fact, she was struggling so badly with her mental health that she tried to take her own life several times. Luckily, she failed, and she retrained as a counsellor, and she is now determined to help as many people as she can with her advice and her work on the website. Sylvia, thank you so much for letting me come to see you. Just tell me about you and your story, and how you got involved with helping people in the sort of therapeutic sense.
In a way, my story is professionally very successful, personal life not so. Had mental health struggles and ended up trying to take my own life quite a few times. Finally talked, went to my GP, transformed, new beginning. In effect, that's it. But the story behind that is I got into banking when I was 18. I come from a very dysfunctional family. I'd always had a pony. At 12 years old, my parents bought me a pony from the New Forest. He'd always been my escape and my passion, my escape from a very difficult home life.
So with that in mind, how did you then end up working with Victoria Wright and Riders Minds?
That came about by my work with the British Grooms Association and the Equestrian Employers Association, and that was on the back of a survey that I saw. I think it was posted on British Eventing. The British Grooms Association had done a survey of the grooms on mental health and the challenges that they were having in that arena, in that space. And I rang British Grooms Association to say who I am and what I do. We got involved, we did Grooms Minds, and then we did Employers Minds. And on the back of that, Victoria and Matthew contacted me and Lucy that had done those websites. And we met and we talked about establishing Riders Minds, and the rest, as they say, is history.
How did you know that you would be able to help horse people? Was it just because you were a rider yourself, or did you have to do any extra work? Just explain how...
And I think that was because I've always loved horses and I've always had horses in my life. And it really stems from horses and horses in my life, always been that therapeutic thing for me. They've always been my balance, my escape, my antidote, my therapy. So I've always experienced at first hand the benefits of having horses in my life and how that's affected me. And then seeing other people at various yards that I've been at and just being around horses. What a wonderful thing it is, and what a wonderful environment it is, and what magnificent creatures they are.
Horses are also my therapy and they are my escape, and it seconds on a horse and everything just becomes great.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I found interesting about this story and this journey and looking at what's happened to Matthew Wright and looking into the mental health of horse riders, professional horse riders, is that if you're working in that environment and if you've got horses 24/7, does that therefore mean they no longer are your escape? And is that fundamentally why it's so much more difficult for riders? What do you think about that?
I think there is an element of that, and I've always wondered if I did work in the equestrian industry, what would be my escape? Or is working in something that you really, really love enough? My personal opinion is it's always good to have a break from things. Change is good as a rest, that type of thing. And I think even being in an environment where something is such a passion can actually there's a balance at which point it tips into it slips away from being a passion. Perhaps then it becomes more demanding, more of a chore, more I would say, rather than becoming in a cheerleader voice, come on, it comes to, come on. And then there's that tipping point where it can tip into something, it loses the passion side.
So you went to meet Victoria and Matthew and you got together and you came up with Riders' Minds, but then tragically, Matthew didn't make it. That must have been really difficult for you, because you'd thrown yourself into this new idea, but actually the one person that set about to try and help himself and other riders didn't make it to the other side.
Yes. And some people have said to me, well, you know, to be quite blunt, some people have said to me, Riders' Minds hasn't done a very good job then, has they, if the founder has taken their own life. I wish he was still here, and I wish he could still see, you know, how brilliant Riders' Minds is doing, the awards we've just won, and the fact that we're all just pushing forward and even driving more for him.
What's your absolute goal with the charity?
I want Riders' Minds to be the go-to for all equestrians. I wanted to be somewhere, for example, if I'm honest, there were times when I knew I was starting to struggle, but if I knew there was a resource that I could go to, wow, I think that would have made a hell of a difference. However, it is what it is. And I would love, if we could stop one person from doing what Matthew did, or if we could help people to do what I did, then we would have, wow, that would be brilliant.
Thank you, Sylvia. You know, we're always being told it's okay to not be okay, aren't we? Matthew Wright even says it on the website, and yet for some reason, horse people are just so bad about talking about depression. And I'm really hoping that this film might help change that, because I think all of us need to be more honest with ourselves and with our families, and we need to do that before it's too late.